This is Land of Havilah, Daniel 5. The secular history of the Babylonian Empire is that after Nebuchadnezzar's death, there was a series of coups and rapid succession of kings for 6 years until Nabonidus and his son Belshazzar took the throne as co-regents. But Nabonidus mostly retired, and that left Belshazzar pretty much by himself, after the two of them had been on the throne 23 years, verse 1. Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords and drank wine before the 1,000. Belshazzar, while he tasted the wine, commanded that the golden and silver vessels which Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem be brought to him, that the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought the golden vessels that were taken out of the temple of God's house, which was at Jerusalem, and the king and his lords, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and of silver, of brass, of iron, of wood, and of stone. Comment in verses 1 to 4, Belshazzar hosted a royal banquet for 1,000 of his lords and nobles. Verse 2 calls Nebuchadnezzar his father. From secular history, Belshazzar and Nebuchadnezzar don't seem to be closely related, but Daniel testifies that Nebuchadnezzar was his father in verse 18, so we'll go with Daniel. But we do recognize that in the biblical sense, a father might mean any type of forebear, no matter how distant. Clearly in this chapter, Belshazzar played up whatever connection he had with the great Nebuchadnezzar as much as he could. The text doesn't exactly say Belshazzar was drunk, but the wine was flowing in verses 1 and 2. He made a point of drinking it before the 1,000 in verse 1, and he was uninhibited in his behavior in verses 3 and 4. In Daniel 1:2 and 2 Chronicles 36:18, Nebuchadnezzar took vessels from God's temple in Jerusalem, sent them to Babylon, and put them in the temple of his own God. That was 66 years ago and 48 years ago. Now in verses 3 and 4, Belshazzar ordered those vessels be brought out. They used them to drink to the gods of gold and silver, and since they wanted to keep drinking and partying, they drank to the god of every material, down to brass, iron, wood, and stone. And if there were anything lower than stone, they would have drunk to that god too. Every step down was a higher insult to Yahweh. Verse 5. In the same hour the fingers of a man's hand came out and wrote near the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. The king saw the part of the hand that wrote. Then the king's face was changed in him, and his thoughts troubled him, and the joints of his thighs were loosened, and his knees struck one against another. Comment in verses 5 and 6, the king sobered up very quickly when he saw a hand appear, writing something on the wall. The expression on his face changed, and his knees went weak. Verse 7. The king cried aloud to bring in the enchanters, the Chaldeans, and the soothsayers. The king spoke and said to the wise men of Babylon, Whoever reads this writing and shows me its interpretation shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold about his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing and couldn't make known to the king the interpretation. Then King Belshazzar was greatly troubled, and his face was changed in him, and his lords were perplexed. The queen, by reason of the words of the king and his lords, came into the banquet house. Comment in verse 10, the queen wasn't in the banquet room when the hand appeared, but she heard about it and then came in. Seemingly she's sober. Verse 10. The queen spoke and said, O king, live forever. Don't let your thoughts trouble you, nor let your face be changed. There's a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy gods, and in the days of your father light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. The king Nebuchadnezzar, your father, yes, the king your father, made him master of the magicians, enchanters, Chaldeans, and soothsayers, because an excellent spirit, knowledge, understanding, interpreting of dreams, showing of dark sentences, and dissolving of doubts were found in the same Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Now let Daniel be called, and he'll show the interpretation. Comment in verse 10, the queen addresses the king respectfully, saying, O king, live forever. He's drunk, and she's about to tell him what he should do in front of all the guests, so her approach is understandable. In verse 11, she emphasizes the king's connection to Nebuchadnezzar. She says, "The king Nebuchadnezzar, your father, yes, the king, your father," end quote. It's as if she's in the habit of associating her husband to Nebuchadnezzar every chance she gets, because Nebuchadnezzar's reputation was so good, and possibly her husband's so bad that he needed all the reflected glory he could get. Previously, in verse 7, Belshazzar called for his wise men, but not for Daniel in particular. He wasn't familiar with Daniel, according to what the queen just said, and even more evidently from what's coming up. Her description of Daniel is a testament to God. She says when Nebuchadnezzar was king, Daniel was master of the wise men because he had an excellent spirit, knowledge, understanding, and could interpret dreams. He could show dark sentences, which means he could explain mysterious statements. He could dissolve doubts, which means his explanations were convincing. He backed up his answers so well that everyone was sure he was correct. So she says, "Now let Daniel be called, and he'll show the interpretation." Verse 13. Then Daniel was brought in before the king. The king spoke and said to Daniel, "Are you that Daniel of the children of the captivity of Judah, whom the king my father brought out of Judah? I've heard of you, that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that light understanding and excellent wisdom are found in you. Now the wise men, the enchanters, have been brought in before me, that they should read this writing and make known to me its interpretation, but they could not show the interpretation of the thing. But I've heard of you that you can give interpretations and dissolve doubts. Now if you can read the writing and make known to me its interpretation, you shall be clothed with purple and have a chain of gold around your neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom." Comment in verse 16, the king says he'll reward Daniel to wear purple clothing, a gold chain around his neck, and to be third ruler in the kingdom. He couldn't make Daniel second in the kingdom for official purposes because his retired father was preeminent. It might have been that purple clothing and a gold chain were markers of a king, and no one else was permitted to wear them. Coming up, Daniel doesn't want any reward and will explain the writing and the entire background of why God put the writing there. It'll be such a detailed and logical answer, it'll dissolve all doubts that he's correct. Verse 17. Then Daniel answered before the king, "Let your gifts be to yourself, and give your rewards to another. Nevertheless, I'll read the writing to the king and make known to him the interpretation. You, king, the Most High God, gave Nebuchadnezzar your father the kingdom and greatness and glory and majesty. Because of the greatness that he gave him, all the peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. He killed whom he wanted to, and kept alive whom he wanted to. He raised up whom he wanted to, and he put down whom he wanted to. But when his heart was lifted up, and his spirit was hardened so that he dealt proudly, he was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. He was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the animals, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. He was fed with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of the sky, until he knew that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of men, and that he sets up over it whomever he will. You, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all this, but have lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of his house before you, and you and your lords, your wives, and your concubines have drunk wine from them. You've praised the gods of silver and gold, of brass, iron, wood, and stone, which don't see or hear or know, and you've not glorified the God in whose hand your breath is, and whose are all your ways. Comment in verse 23, God's hand is in all Belshazzar's ways, meaning God made him what he is. Every move Belshazzar made that put him where he is, God was in it. Even his breath is in God's hands. And to think now Belshazzar has lifted himself up against God. He has no excuse because he knows the whole story of how God humbled his predecessor Nebuchadnezzar, and he knew the explicit lesson of it, that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of men and sets up over it whomever he will. Still speaking of God, Daniel says, "The hand was from him," verse 24. Then the part of the hand was sent from before him, and this writing was inscribed. Comment in verse 24, God sent part of a hand to do the writing. It wasn't God's hand exactly, just a generic hand. Verse 25. This is the writing that was inscribed, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. Comment Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin is Daniel's translation of the unknown text on the wall from whatever it was in into Aramaic. But even though they understood the words when Daniel translated them, they didn't know what God meant by them. Therefore, Daniel says, verse 26, "This is the interpretation of the thing. Mene, God has counted your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you're weighed in the balances and are found wanting. Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians." Comment in verses 26 to 28, the meaning of the writing is that Belshazzar has been weighed and found wanting. Therefore, God will strip him of the kingdom and divide it to the Medes and Persians. This is God giving the kingdom of men to whomever he wishes. Pharsin in verse 25 is the plural form of Peres in verse 28, NET translation notes, so it's completely explicable that the two words don't look alike. Verse 29. Then Belshazzar commanded, and they clothed Daniel with purple and put a chain of gold about his neck and made proclamation concerning him that he should be the third ruler in the kingdom. In that night Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was slain. Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. Comment in verses 30 and 31, and according to secular history, the transition was very sudden from Belshazzar and his Babylonian kingdom to the kingdom of the Medes and Persians. In reading this chapter, the question arises, how is it possible that Belshazzar was so unaware of the threat? Didn't he know an army was approaching? His lack of awareness can be explained by some of his own plotting against him and ushering in the Medes and Persians for a surprise attack. It's clear from secular history that they came in through open gates, and Cyrus, king of the Medes and Persians at this time, said in his records it was a welcome liberation from an unpopular king, which supports the whole theory that it was an inside job. Jeremiah 51:31 describes that night vividly in a prophecy, quote, "One runner will run to meet another, and one messenger to meet another, to show the king of Babylon that his city is taken on every quarter," end quote. In other words, runners kept coming to Belshazzar from every quarter of the city, telling him the city was taken, and he didn't survive the night. Verse 31 says, Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. He must have been the local governor appointed by Cyrus to rule Babylon and the surrounding area, because the Bible and secular history agree that not Darius but Cyrus was the supreme king of the Medo-Persian Empire during this conquest. So the lesson of the chapter is humility toward God, recognition that he rules the kingdom of men and sets over it whomever he will, not to mention that he gives us every breath and his hand is in everything we do. Daniel 6 is next.